right, well, thank you all for joining us here today. This is a little strange. It's a combination of a webinar and a meeting, so we'll make it fairly informal. And how we're going to run this today is the first part of this discussion will be more like a webinar. We'll be having Dave Fosbrook and Jennifer Lincoln doing a presentation on internal traffic control and some of the research that NIOSH has conducted over the last 9 or so years related to runovers and backovers, internal traffic control, etc. And because of the way the webinars work, there's about a 10 to 15 second delay between what happens actually here in the room and what people are able to see over the internet. As such, that will make kind of an interactive dialogue very difficult when we're in the webinar format. So what we will do is about halfway through the program, once the presentations are finished and we don't need to have the visuals up anymore, we'll switch over to a conference code mode. So those of you who are watching online, I've sent out the phone number. If you don't have that, please feel free to call in to ARTBA and ask for Omar Lopez, and he'll be able to give you that conference code number and code. And so about halfway through, we will switch over to a conference call format so we can have a live discussion, and those who are not here in the room will be able to communicate instantaneously. We won't have that delay. So to begin with, just to give a little bit of background, I sent out a paper that hopefully most of you received, those that weren't traveling here, by email this morning, just to give a little background on what this project is all about. And I will go over that again briefly. American Road and Transportation Builders has a contract with NIOSH to develop a program, a train-the-trainer program on internal traffic control. The idea is, again, to take a lot of the research and the information that NIOSH has developed over the years, including the program, a training program that they developed, and turn this into a product that will be useful in the industry. Something, a type of training, and that format is for a lot of discussion of what we'll be doing here today and what we have you experts joining us for. But to create this training program in a format that will be useful, both for trainers and for workers. So we're looking at multiple levels of training. The process here is today, during this meeting, NIOSH will present their information and their findings. We'll follow up with subsequent information and more handouts for you. And then we'll reconvene in about a month in December. And what we'll be looking for in that second meeting from this expert task force is for you to give us information back of, okay, we've had a chance to look at this information, what can we do with this, and how can we make it useful to the industry and for the various target audiences that we want to reach. And that's really the critical thing for us then to once we have that information, we'll work again with an expert task force, with professional training developers, with NIOSH, to then develop a course and refine it over about the next 12 months. We hope to have this finished in about a year. So, and ready to present. So, anything else that I should be letting them know, Jennifer or Dave? All right, with that, then I will be turning the time over to Dave. He's going to make a presentation, and Jennifer as well, and show us some toys, and then we'll move on with the program. So, here we go.
Thank you, Brad. Again, we're going to be focusing on designing internal traffic control plans, and I am David Fosbrook from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, Division of Safety Research out of Morgantown, West Virginia. And my co-presenter from the same location is Jennifer Lincoln, and we probably, I dare say, have spent more time looking at how do you actually make an internal traffic control plan work on the job site than probably anybody in the country since this concept was developed by the laborers a number of years ago back in the late 90s. This is an outline of what we're going to talk about today, and originally our intent was that we would actually do the training that we actually do with contractors, trying to train them how do you do an internal traffic control plan. And we thought about it a little bit more, and ARTBA and through them, the rest of you all will have access to that actual training program because that's on a CD. So what we figured we'd do is we give a little more background on how we got where we are, where the whole concept of internal traffic control plans come from, why are they important, what have we done to develop internal traffic control plans, the training that we have developed and what went into developing that training, and a little bit on how they actually are implemented, out where the asphalt actually gets laid down. To start with, we have to go back to 1998 when we held a conference here in D.C. with a cross-sector of the roadway construction industry. We were focused on trying to identify measures to reduce injuries to workers in highway work zones. We started with a plenary session and a couple of workshops, and one of those workshops was focusing on how we prevent workers from being backed over by construction equipment. We took the recommendations from the stakeholders, and one of those recommendations was there have been several things recommended that sound nice on paper. It'd be nice to have someone actually go out and do the research in the field. We as companies or we as state agencies don't have the kind of resources or evaluation expertise. You pointing to me? Oh, sorry. Expertise, and so we would like to have someone actually do an evaluation of some of these good ideas. So we started out with this program evaluating roadway work zone interventions, which was a multi-city attempt to evaluate a variety of intervention measures, one of which includes internal traffic control plans. So exactly what is an internal traffic control plan? Well, it's a way of coordinating vehicle equipment and movement within the work site. That's its primary focus. Limit the exposure of workers on foot to the movement of dump trucks and other types of equipment, and then also to reduce hazards to equipment operators on site. The concept was originally part of the SHARP program. Through the laborers, they had a contract with Federal Highway Administration to develop a variety of things, and one of those things that came out of that was the whole concept of an internal traffic control plan. They developed a paving model, a trenching model, and a dirt spread model, and I'll show you what those look like here in a moment. This one here is a paving model. Essentially, these models concentrated on the movement of material into and out of the job site. So in this case, you had a paving machine with a roller behind it, and the question really that was being addressed by this internal traffic control plan was simply, how are you going to bring the material in, and how are you going to get it out? This is a dirt spread model, which was the same thing, where the concept was you want to bring in your truck from the back end of the operation. You want it to go out through the front end of the operation. As you moved along, you're backfilling on that side of the slide. On my side of the slide, you're opening up. So you had the dump trucks coming in, going out with full material. You had new material coming in behind for the backfill. Again, essentially, the bulk of the internal traffic control plan was how do you move material in and out of the job site. You can take that even to a stationary site. This is one that I drew up for a temporary batch plant, for example, where you might have repetitive loading and unloading from that particular pile, a gravel pile, say into a conveyor belt. The frowny guy represents where a worker might go that might be a bad place, which would be in the blind area or in the area where the loader operator couldn't see them. You might want to try to do something better than that. So essentially what you're trying to do here is fight human nature, which might be to take the easiest path. And so you might set up fencing represented by the yellow dashed line, which would force the workers to walk around rather than walking in that operating area of the loader. So that's the basic concept. The key principles for internal traffic control plans are to limit the access points to your work zone, reduce the need to back equipment wherever possible, coordinate truck and equipment movements, establish worker-free zones, and, of course, inform your workers what your internal traffic control plan is all about. If you think of the MUTCD, it essentially is a traffic control plan for safely getting the motoring public safely past our job sites. And the idea of the internal traffic control plan was to move inside the barrels and make a mini traffic control plan for that gray box that just says, here, other stuff happens. That's the means and methods for the contractor. It isn't really been traditionally within the concern of the MUTCD, and so what we're trying to do is say, can we take some of those traffic control principles from things like the MUTCD, from things like other modes of transportation such as the FAA and how ground crews work around airplanes, from things like coast guards and interwaterways, and can we take some of those good practices and bring them inside the barrels so that it would help keep our workers from being run over by equipment. How does a traffic control plan compare with an internal traffic control plan? Well, where a traffic control plan deals with motor vehicles, we're concerned with the internal traffic control plan with construction equipment. The MUTCD is the guiding document for traffic control plans, and we developed a development guide to try to give some guidance on how to develop internal traffic control plans. There are typicals, and the analog for the internal traffic control plan would be internal traffic control diagrams. And then there are typical application notes. The analog for us is the ITC notes. And then finally, where we think of the traffic control plan as being within the purview of the traffic safety engineer, really we feel that the internal traffic control plan is developed and makes it work or not work by the foreman and the site superintendents that are there on the job site. A little bit about why are they needed. Of course, the paving operations, and we've worked mostly in hot mix asphalt operations, but this applies to other construction operations as well, is chaos, somewhat organized. And the concept is that the more that you can organize your chaos, the less you can make bad things happen. You have a lot of things going on, a lot of different operations that impinge on each other, and the internal traffic control plan is a way of getting those different parties, such as the traffic control person who was driving the pickup truck, to understand how his actions impact what's happening to the rest of the paving operation. When we looked at data on fatalities in the roadway construction industry from 92 through 2000, we kind of looked at the number of fatalities due to traffic vehicles, which you see in green as being relatively flat. And what we were seeing is more and more workers were being killed by our own equipment. And so that's one of the reasons we got involved in internal traffic control plans. With an internal traffic control plan, you can take into account some of those other operations that take place all the time, such as in this case measuring lane widths. In this case, putting somebody up in a truck queue to measure a lane width. One of the things you might want to do is make sure that you have those trucks that are in that truck queue at an absolute standstill under control of someone, so that someone doesn't accidentally back into someone who's working around the back end of trucks. You also need to integrate what's happening inside the barrels with what's happening outside the barrels. So we get into the issues of access and egress points and trying to identify what can you do inside the workspace that will make it safer for you to get out of your workspace. One particular area that we found a lot of issues with or problems with is how are you going to get your ground worker to get the ticket from your truck driver? And these are some things that we want to consider with internal traffic control plans, as well as other hazards on sites. And what is the focus of workers when they're looking at a particular hazard on site? In this case, you're looking at a bridge. And what special communications might need to take place when you're around an operation such as an overpass so that you don't wind up trying to tell your dump truck driver to lower his bed and have him actually pull out instead. And, of course, making sure that things like this are taken into account as well. We don't think that vest was put up there initially to identify the line. We think that it was broken first. But how are you going to identify those hazards at sites? And what about those things that take place on your job site that really are not part of the paving process? And I could talk for hours on the whole issue of cell phones, so I won't. I'll save you having to listen to that. But where are the safe areas that are on site for those other activities to take place? And then the final shots here are the skid steer loader and how comfortable are crews with the skid steer loader, and how does our operation change when we need to pull in a skid steer or a backhoe to pick up spilled asphalt, for example. Where do we want our workers to be? Where do we not want our workers to be? Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the development of the intervention itself. We were tasked with taking a good idea that was on paper, which is an internal traffic control plan, put it out on actual job sites, collect data before it happened, teach the contractor how to do the internal traffic control plan, and then as they were implementing an internal traffic control plan, collect data and see if there was an improvement in reducing worker exposure to being struck by equipment. So in order to develop that, we started out with that concept and the things that I've talked about so far that came from Graham and Miglitz, who were the engineering firm that was contracted by the laborers back in the mid to late 90s. Well, when we first got involved in this, we thought that actually we'd be able to go to any construction company and say, we'd like to see some of your internal traffic control plans, we'd like to see where you're using them, where you're not using them, and that would be our comparison. But in fact, we were not able to find contractors that had internal traffic control plans. So we decided we'd hire another engineering firm, C.L. Williams, to actually observe job sites. And while the actual operation was going on, they would make an internal traffic control plan so that there would be sample internal traffic control plans for asphalt operations as well as for concrete operations. And then they would result in what's on the right-hand side, which is a development guide. And our concept was we would hand these development guides to a contractor and say, this is what we need you to do. We would like to come out on your job sites, collect data without your doing this, and then we'd like you to do this, and then we will continue to collect data, and we'll make a comparison. And one of the contractors that we first gave this to is here in the room, and we gave this to them and had several meetings and came to the conclusion that we were not going to be able just to hand this one document to a contractor and have them know what we wanted them to do. Part of this document was a legend for different pieces of equipment, which we've hung on to that as we've developed the internal traffic control plan, as well as, as well as an engineering drawing that was done in AutoCAD. What we moved to from that was saying, okay, if we can't hand this document to a contractor and then have them do it on site, we need to develop a training program to train those who are going to do the internal traffic control plan how to do one. And this is us with one of our early pilots on that training program. Essentially, the internal traffic control plan training tools that we used are listed on this slide. They involved a Microsoft PowerPoint presentation. We developed a toolbox talk based on a fatality case. We had a hands-on development session where they actually looked at their plans. And then we helped the contractor to actually draw an internal traffic control plan. You can see the participants that we had in these training sessions. We feel everyone who has an opportunity to influence how vehicles and equipment move on site or walk around moving equipment on site needs to have someone representing them at those training sessions. As I mentioned, this was sort of basically a Microsoft PowerPoint process. And we moved from that to, and I'm going to give an example down here, a process that used scale models, what Brad referred to as toys. That's it. That's it. So if we can shift the camera down over here, let me just give you one example of a concept that we would try to get across through the use of scale models. In this case, and I'm not sure if the webinar is caught up with me or not, but we have 3 lanes, and we have the paving operation taking place in the middle lane. And what that typically means is either the operation went from right to left or from left to right, from the inside to the out or the outside to the in. How you decide to lay out that work can make a difference in terms of the safety of your workers on site, and I'll show you how. If you paved this lane here first, now it has asphalt on it and you can't drive on it. That means that your truck drivers are driving on this side. That has the bonus that the driver can see the crew without the obstruction of the hood as he drives through the job site. In contrast, if you pave this side first, and now we're paving the middle, you would no longer be able to pave here. Now, as your driver drives down along, he's got this large hood, this large blind spot out on the front right-hand side of the truck. And we have actually witnessed truck drivers kind of standing up on their toes and reaching and looking over that hood as they were trying to be sure that they were not going to run into somebody on the paving crew. So something as simple as the direction of the way you lay out your job can actually impact how well your truck drivers can see the paving crew as they go back and forth. Another little example that I'll do just very briefly is where people stand can definitely affect how close a driver gets. In fact, we as researchers found that if we stood here on the outside, truck drivers would tend to crowd the paving crew. So we ourselves, as we were collecting data and observing operations, had to make sure we had kept ourselves out of the way of the paving operation. Now that applies to everybody else who comes out on site who's watching what's going on, whether it be an inspector, whether it be your QA, QC technicians, whether it be your safety directors and whatnot. So those are just a couple of the simple examples that we were able to demonstrate more efficiently by using scale models. And then the last part of the the training that we had developed for these contractors was to actually work with their drawings to develop an internal traffic control plan, because it didn't really become real to them as we were giving the examples and all those sorts of things till we talked about what are the different problems that might be created by a particular ramp or by the intersection of a ramp with traffic, or having to change where the asphalt came from because a plant shut down. So we would ask questions like that and say, how do things change when these changes happen during the course of the day? Following that, we developed a couple of other pieces of information with the Roadway Work Zone Safety and Health Alliance. We kind of did a promotional brochure to kind of say, what is an internal traffic control plan, just a very brief layout. And this has been used in the state of Washington, where they were going to actually require internal traffic control plans. That did not pass. Then the final part, really, of our developing where we are at today is that we spent about 300 and some odd days, almost an entire year's worth over the course of 3 years, actually walking the asphalt ourselves, watching operations, taking notes on where pieces of equipment moved, and so forth. We've also been working with the North American Association of Transportation Safety and Health Officials. These are safety directors for state agencies responsible for their agency personnel, for them to develop a training program as well. And that's something that you'll all have access to. And with that, we're going to shift into more details about how the ITCP training programs were developed, a little bit about what kind of information really needs to go into internal traffic control plans. And for that, here's Jennifer.
Thank you. We talked about what we went through as far as process of dealing with the concept, but we spent a good amount of time trying to develop our training program. And I don't have the information detailed on what we put in there, but just some basic examples of what went into our training program. Okay. So first thing we did was we did the comparison between the traffic control plan and the internal traffic control plan. We brought together some of our face cases to have some real life cases as to what happened if someone is in a bad scenario, backing events, driving forward events, events that happened at the asphalt plant, to try and get some real life examples in front of them. We introduced safe backing principles, communication, human factors, worker visibility, and roles and responsibilities for the internal traffic control plan. So this is one of the examples for the face cases where they have a concrete paving operation. In this scenario, basically what happened was the trucks were all queued up, and they had this spot here up on the right that they had to turn around, and then the trucks that were in the front got to the place where they needed to turn around, and then everybody had to back up. So they sent somebody down to the other end, and the person who was telling people where to back up to was hit. So what happened is he was repositioning the trucks and he was backed into. So then we went into some basic backing safety as far as worker operations, operators, spotters, and other workers on site, and some of the basic communications for backing. For operators, what to look out for, trying to get them to get out and do a walk around if they saw somebody there and then all of a sudden they're not there, get out and take a look around to see where that person might have gone, using a spotter when possible. And then some spotter safety rules, trying to stay within the visibility areas of the operator, trying to stay within the mirrors. Basic communication. How do you communicate with your people on site? Is it hand communication? Is it walkie-talkies? Is it CB radios? We were told that the CB radios, those truck drivers don't use those anymore. And we actually had a site where they had CB radios in all the trucks, and then there was a CB radio mounted on the paver. So the paver operator was able to communicate with the whole trucking fleet to let them know when things changed. So those kind of things are possible. Human factors, expectations, perceptions, reaction time, ability of the individual drivers. When the driver's out on site, the asphalt delivery truck driver is trained to do one specific thing. They're trained to go on site, get rid of that load, and leave. So when you violate some of those rules or regulations in their mind, that's when you come into trouble. Worker visibility, trying to get high vis on people, makes people wear hard hats on site to create a little more visibility, making sure that the equipment is well maintained, mirrors, glass, and then looking at blind areas of the different kinds of equipment, whether they're older models or newer models. We contracted with Caterpillar to develop some blind area diagrams. We had 32 pieces of equipment. We actually have a website with all the pieces of equipment out there. Were blind areas for ground level, at barrel height, and then at about 5 feet. So you can go there and get access to all those blind areas. We've also used the blind areas as training tools during our trainings to try and get an idea. You can see on this one how far the blind area extends in front of that truck, which is an example of why it's so important to make sure, if you can have the trucks come in where the operation's on their left side versus their right side, why it's so important, because that truck driver really can't see somebody up there, especially if somebody's bent over, picking something up or trying to fix a string line or something like that. And trying to get across the fact that there are blind areas to every piece of equipment out there, dump trucks and pickup trucks. This has a wonderful "Don't hit me" sign on it because we actually saw a state inspector hit this. So, and this is probably about 6 inches off the ground, but he looked like a bucking bronco out there when he hit it. So everything out on site has a blind area. How are you going to park to make sure that when you leave you can go forward and not have to back up, and you don't pull yourself up snug on something that you're going to forget that was there in the future? During our training session, we created, prior to our training session, we created activities for them to mark so that they could figure out where the blind areas are of pieces of equipment. We had them mark an H in each of the little quadrants that they believed were a hazardous area of a piece of equipment where they shouldn't be standing. We also marked on there where the turning radiuses of the vehicles are. So if the vehicle decides to go the operator decides to go one way or the other, where might be dangerous for that person to stand. So we did an activity for the dump truck as well as a loader, because the loader itself and a roller is articulated, so they act a little bit differently. This is an example of what we came up with as far as hazardous areas around a dump truck. You can see that the red areas are the highest risk, and then the yellow areas are a lower risk, and the green area we consider really, really low risk. And the gray area in the middle is the actual representation of the dump truck itself. Through all this, we looked at blind areas, we looked at equipment travel paths, and we developed things called worker-free zones, which are areas where the workers on foot should not congregate, stand, talk, whatever throughout the day. And these are based upon, again, the equipment blind areas, the travel lanes, operation speeds, and other hazardous areas like overhead power lines. So as you're going through the operation, you should be aware that you're standing under a power line. Yes, the dump truck's going to raise its bed. It's probably not a good place to stand if you have the choice. From that, we had them do a worker-free zone activity where they were actually going to mark out where they should not stand during the paving operation. There are some typical places that the truck driver expects people to stand, because there's spotters that end up standing on the left side of the paver. There's the screed operators that stand on the rear side of the paver, and then there's usually some loop men towards the back. So there's going to be some basic areas where the truck drivers are going to expect you to be, but where shouldn't you be? Where are the spots that those truck drivers don't expect you to be? And then this is an example of us being out on site. Like you said, we spent about 300 days out on the asphalt sites. Some basic resources that we use to develop it. And then from that background information, I'm going to talk about what goes into the internal traffic control plan. We said that there's a diagram and then there's notes. The notes consist of injury reduction measures, site-specific conditions, duties of people on site, equipment and personnel that are expected to be on site, and safety points. And this is an example of one of the internal traffic control plan diagrams that we came up with, one of the paving contractors. This one, they had a lot of space. They were able to actually park their unused vehicles on an adjacent lane. It was brand new roadway. And then you can see some of the movements on the lower portion of the diagram. This is an example of some safety points. It brings to light the truck operating speed, where the ticket taker should stand. We found when we were out on site, the ticket taker greatly influences where that truck goes on site. If the ticket taker stands close to the paving operation, that truck driver is going to pull in close because his job when he shows up on site is to get rid of that ticket. So where that ticket taker stands greatly affects everyone else's safety on site. And then a list of equipment and personnel on site. And this equipment personnel may include, well, we expect there to be a concrete operation going on the north end of the site. We don't know exactly how many people are going to be going there during the operations, but we expect that that's going to be going on today. And when you're coming into site, you may have to come in a different direction because of that operation. We actually ran into that issue ourselves. Or any other kind of operations, whether we've been on a lot of fast track operations where they're digging at the front end and they're laying down lines at the back end. So what other operations are going on site? And then how is an ITCP itself created? We have several, Dave went into who did what. We found that in order for an internal traffic control plan to be most effectively accomplished, we needed to have in the room the paving contractor, the truck driver, the trucking boss, the state inspector who's going to be in charge of all the state employees on site, and then any QC people that may be contracted. We need to have all the key players that are going to be on site there because they each have different contributing factors, different concerns. Because this may be the first time that these people have actually sat down in a room together and talked, other than during an initial contract. We had truck drivers say, you know, it really makes me nervous.
Please press any key on your phone to...
It really makes me nervous when you stand here. And the people on the ground didn't have a clue that that was an issue. They didn't know that the truck drivers even cared. But this meeting allows this conversation to happen. We have several steps in creating the diagram. The first thing we do is break out the plans. We want to see, okay, what are you going to be paving, what lane, what phase for each day, what's going to be accomplished. You want to identify what your hazards are, where your bridges are, where your overhead power lines are, where some grade shifts happen. Identify what your equipment and personnel is, and then basically draw out your site. And for this photo, you can see that they parked all the extra vehicles on the left-hand side, and then they had the paving operation happening down the middle. And then, like I said, they parked all their vehicles on the left-hand side. Where are you going to put those unused pieces of equipment? When you have everyone show up in the morning with their pickup trucks, where that foreman parks in the morning generally is where everybody else is going to park. So you need to think about where you're parking your pickup trucks at the beginning of the day. Where are you going to leave them? And where are you going to park vehicles that you use every once in a while, like that front-end loader that comes in and cleans up a mess? Where are you going to park that? How is it going to affect the movement of vehicles on site? Determine where your worker-free zones are and make sure you convey this to everybody on site. So this is a basic diagram that we used during our initial training. You can see how we used our examples of bringing trucks in, where they're going to queue in, where they're going to stage, and how they're going to back up and leave the site. But most of all, what we want to get across to everybody is to take into account that this is the whole site. You know, this isn't just happening right around the paver. The internal traffic control plan applies to everything. This is an overhead photo of a concrete operation. But you can see all the traffic's been diverted over here. The paver's back here, and the trucks are in here. And then way over here, they have all their ancillary equipment and pickup trucks staged. some details on the ITC notes, their injury reduction measures, site-specific conditions, duties, personal equipment. During this whole process, we came up with some basic rules. I'm not going to read all the rules, but we came up with about 12 different rules to try and think about as you're creating the internal traffic control plan. Things like limiting your access, reducing backing, establishing the speed limit, worker-free zones, trying to keep your equipment operators and your drivers inside the vehicles. The more people you can keep inside your vehicles versus being on the ground, the better. Even during slow times, those truck drivers like to get out and they like to hang out and talk to each other. So if we can convince them to stay inside their vehicles, that's that many less people that are on the ground. And then we definitely want to get across that there needs to be an internal traffic control plan developed for each lane that's paved because it changes. It affects everything that's going on site. So, with that, any questions? There's our contact information.
All right, for those of you on the phone, we're now going to end the webinar, and we're going to move to a conference call format. And we'll take about a 5-minute break in doing that because there is a 30-second or so delay, so you'll be seeing this after we've actually ended. Just for your information, let me provide you one more time. I'm going to disappear off screen the numbers to call in. For those calling in, you will dial 1-800-399-1052. That's 1-800-399-1052. When prompted, you'll enter the passcode 227-67543. 227-67543. So we'll take just a few minute break and bring everybody live on the phones. Thank you.